We are delighted to welcome our first guest speaker of the year and a fellow co-host of mine to the meetup, Mr. Fred Deichler. Before we start, I would love to introduce you to a little bit of our sponsors because we wouldn't be able to do this without it. So the tool you're using today, if you've never used it before, it's called Butter. It's very cool. It was designed to ease a lot of the challenges we face with virtual tooling, where you would be in Zoom and you'd have to send someone to one tool for polling, i.e. Monte, and another tool for virtual collaboration, i.e. Mural, and it brings all of this inside one tool to make that very streamlined for a facilitator, trainer, or indeed anyone who hosts meetings. So if you want to give it a try, there is a 7-day free trial and 30% off your first 3 months subscription if you would like to give Butter a try. And you'll see some of the cool things it can do if you've never been involved with it before today. And also, I deliver training over several months. I've got my first one of the year, and my next one of those starting February 5th. It's a 6-month journey to teach Scrum Mastery that focuses on developing competence, and capability that goes beyond the standard 2-day trainings. There is a discount code or a saving for you if you would like to avail of that. Without any further ado, however, I would love to introduce formally Mr. Fred Deichler, who's going to be speaking to us today. There's a bit of a Legend of Zelda theme if you're a video game fan. It's all around dropping velocity and using the Triforce of predictable delivery. Before we do that, I just want to do a quick sense check as to where you are on the scale of velocity. So, on the left-hand side, that should say I'm a fan, meaning I'm a fan of velocity. On the right-hand side, you've got David from Schitt's Creek saying, ew. Where do you sit when it comes to velocity? Left or right? It's a fair mixture at the moment. Maybe David is edging it. Okay. I will hand it over to Fred. You're up, my friends. You got this.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting me. Yeah, I'm actually right in the middle of that one, and that was very intriguing because sometimes it's the right thing for a team at the time. I'm gonna go ahead and share. Now, as I'm going through, I probably won't be able. I'm not sure if I can see the chat. I have 2 monitors, but so if you have anything you want to ask, feel free. That we have a nice hand icon for a queue, or you can ask. There'll also be time at the end, and so welcome to my talk. Drop velocity and start using the Triforce of predictive delivery, or as I like to say, how you can turn waterfall nightmares into agile delivery dreams. My name is Fred Deichler. As Chris introduced me, I'm Agile coach, international speaker based out of Grants Pass, Oregon in the USA. It is 10 a.m. for me here. I know it's in the evening for those of you joining from Europe. And I like to say that I enable effective and efficient teams by leveraging process and tools to aid individuals' interactions. I really do have a strong belief in tooling and process, but not so much as to take away the interactions between people. So it's just about supporting them. And if we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me. We can talk about all sorts of things. So I want to start off. I want to tell you a story. And the story has a title. It's called A New Experiment Each Sprint. Now, when I heard this from product owner, it was music to my ears. I spent many months coaching this PO, and what I was working on was finally starting to click with them. They actually parroted that phrase. They said a new experiment each sprint. I was so excited to be able to take them on their journey. And then the PO, with bright eyes, shared a beautiful image with me of a Gantt chart. And you all work with Gantt charts. They speak for themselves. And this is pretty much me with my wide eyes going, oh my gosh, this is not really what I was thinking about when I heard a new experiment each sprint. But being a good Scrum Master, I knew that my client had an outcome in mind, my client, the team, the product owner. And I was going to try to make that happen. But at that moment in time, I just didn't know how. Fast forward to the weekend. Here's a little bit of Zelda. This is a Zelda Light version. I was playing some games, um, and I thought that I noticed something off in the horizon. What? A new experiment each sprint. Um, and while playing, this idea came to my mind. It was this idea about how I could execute these experiments in a sprint, and it was embodied in this Triforce. It had three parts to this Triforce of predictive delivery: Monte Carlo forecasting, evidence-based management, and WIP limits. Through these three concepts, I was going to build them together to empower my team to this delivery. And today we're going to talk about those three and how you can apply them in your work. So first, let's start off with Monte Carlo forecasting. Um, Feel free, raise hands, whatever you want in the chat if you have used this. I'm going to talk a little about where it came from and how I've used it. So if you weren't aware, I see some thumbs. Monte Carlo forecasting is actually pretty old. I found out that it was at the Los Alamos laboratory during World War II is when they actually came up with this idea. And yes, in fact, it is named after the Monte Carlo casino in Monaco. And it's the core principle of it. It's around um, doing repeated random sampling to achieve numerical results. We're talking about tens of thousands to millions of permutations based on, in our context, what we've actually done. So we're going to take our real historical data as a team to predict the levels of probability of what might happen. Now, when you first start talking about probabilistic forecasting versus deterministic, it's quite the mouthful to try to explain to people because they're usually of this mindset like we've done this amount of work, so we can do that amount of work, and it's very, like I said, deterministic. But we want to shift that mindset to probabilistic. It's not saying we won't, but we're saying what the chance that we might do it. Now, when I first heard about it, actually, I don't know when I first heard about it, but I do have lots of memories of hearing the voice of Dan Vacanti and Pratik Singh on the Drunk Agile podcast, talking about this concept. And even, there's Dan. Dan has a book, Actionable Agile Metrics for Predictability, an introduction. And oh my gosh, what an introduction it is. So I heard about this. I thought it was pretty neat. I tried to replicate it myself with spreadsheets. They weren't quite right because it wasn't truly random. It didn't give that sampling, and so I ended up finding a great resource for this. And Monte Carlo forecasting is one of the cornerstones of the Triforce of predictive delivery. And when you go through Monte Carlo forecasting, you're presented with something that kind of looks like this. Now, what you see here, this is a graph that I drew. Excel did not produce this. Where on the top or on the vertical axis, that's the occurrences. So how often a situation happens in this random data set. And across the horizontal axis is how many items you've completed. And so I think they say you need at least 10 items completed to start to forecast out. But the power of this is you take this probability, you take um, this data you have completed, feed it into this tool I'm going to share with you, and tell you what you might do. And the way you read this is, if I look at this screen here, there's a saying there's a 70% chance in the next sprint or next time box we create, we will get 7 items done. This is based on what you have done. It's taking the guesswork out of it. It's using science. It's using empiricism. It's using um, actual data versus guessing. There's an 85% chance you'll get 5 done in this example. Now, the way to read this is also the opposite of that. Is there's a 30% chance that we will not get 7 done. 15% chance we won't get 5 done. Now, one thing Monte Carlo forecasting doesn't give us, it doesn't tell us which 7 we're going to get done or which 5 we're going to get done. It's just saying based on past performance, you're probably going to get this many done. And so how can we take that and apply that to our real life? What I have here is some data I pulled from Jira, some sprint data. And now I did change some of the information to protect the innocent. So if we take this data here on this Fred project and we summarize it, what we get is this table here. And you've probably seen these kind of things. You've probably done it yourself. You look at your past sprints, like how many story points have I done? How many PBIs, product backlog items have I done? And what we've probably done traditionally is just take these as rolling trends or rolling averages to give that guidance to your team. Maybe go the step further and you look at availability between company meetings and vacation to give even further guidance, manipulate, shape that data. But still, it's very much deterministic. It's saying, because we've done this, we are going to do that. But with Monte Carlo forecasting, we can take this data, and there's a great website from Several Wise Games called the Agile Monte Carlo Estimation. It's probably one of the easiest ones I've seen to use at severalwisegames.com/tool/Monte Carlo. You can just look them up on Google. It's a great and easy use tool. And what we do is we'll take and we'll put our information in from our past performance, and it does stories or it does like PBIs or story points. Your choice. It's going to come out with a relative result. So we plug that data in, like from this table here, and what we have is some confidence intervals, is what they call them, for what we might do. Now, one thing on what Severwise does is they call them bets. Um, I'm not. I mean, bet is a great term. I'm not a fan of how they label them. Um, I believe conservative for me is actually more realistic, the 80% probability. Um, but that's me. That's my comfort level. That's probably why when Chris was asking earlier on the weird scale, I was definitely on the more left side of that graphic. Is where I felt myself to be. I'm a little bit more conservative in my coaching of agile teams. And so what this tells us, if we look down at the bottom right one, where we see that outline of the what we might do, I might pick that 80% confidence rate of the conservative, which says that in the next sprint, there's an 80% chance that we are going to get 13 work items done. It doesn't say which 13, but saying, hey, if you make a sprint that's 13 items, you have 80% chance here that you're probably going to get it done. Feels pretty good to me. I would easily go to a product owner and have that conversation. So we'll say that's the size of our sprint. So to recap Monte Carlo, it's thousands to millions of simulations based on the real data. It gets you into a probabilistic mindset instead of deterministic. It works for PBIs or story points. Either of those can help you. I'd probably lean more towards PBIs. Although my current organization, we use story points, I still support them 100%. And there's a great tool. So that's a very brief overview of Monte Carlo forecasting, which is one um, corner of the Triforce of predictive delivery. And the next thing we have is evidence-based management. Now, once again, if you've used or potentially certified in evidence-based management, why don't you go ahead and give us some reaction here in this call? Excellent. I love that. And so, if you weren't aware, evidence-based management, it's published on Scrum.org. It was co-created by Ken Schwaber, who was the co-creators of Scrum. Originally released in 2015, it's been modified a few times. Now, one thing to know about EBM is, at its core, it's a goal-setting framework. But what I really love is that it helps organizations in a complex world use empiricism, which we talk about all the time. There's similarities to OKRs, but one thing I love about EBM is that it focuses on value specifically. Now, this image was generated by ChatGPT, so the words aren't right on there, but it does focus on four what they call KVAs, or key value areas: current value, unrealized value, ability to innovate, and time to market. Now, as a numbers guy, ability to innovate definitely stood out to me. And let's see, there we go. Okay. Stood out to me. And that's what I first dove into with EBM. And it applies well to this Triforce of predictive delivery. It's another cornerstone. Now, this is the actual graphic you'll find on scrum.org and in the EBM white paper, which outlines those business values that's looking for. So whenever you're looking at a goal from a EBM perspective, you think like, what is that value we are driving into that. Um, I'm doing it a complete disservice. I'd recommend plenty of resources out there, including, I think, a new book got published in December on EBM that I strongly encourage you, from Ryan Ripley, Todd Miller, and other people whose names I cannot remember right now. But it's a fascinating framework for looking at goals and value. Now, like I mentioned, ability to innovate. That's just one section of it, and it's the one that applies to the Triforce. Now, if you look at the guide on scrum.org, one of the great things about the EBM white paper guide is at the end of it, it lists a bunch of examples of different ways you can measure it. You might say ability to innovate is related to your technical debt. Like that, definitely, if you have a lot of technical debt, it does impact your ability to innovate. Production incident count is another one that impacts your ability to innovate. Active code branches, if you're maintaining a lot of stuff, you spend more time maintaining than you spend innovating. Now, for predictive delivery, the one I like is actually one that is called innovation rate. And this is how what comes next is like how I define it. So for innovation rate, what we're really looking at is what is our mix of improvements versus defects. And this is just a graph that I drew out looking at like bugs versus stories. Depending on your context, you'll have to modify this as need be, but it's like how much time are we spending working on stuff we've already done versus how much time are we spending working on things that are going to improve our product for our customers. Now, this one I don't use any kind of fancy formulas with. It's just like looking at this kind of this rate on average. So if we go back to our Jira data, one thing you'll see is I added here was an issue type column. Right next to issue type column. And if we take that data from those issue types, put it into a table, figure this all out, we can get our mix of our improvements versus defects. And this is done on a unit count or PBI count. It is not done on story points because that's very contextually it's relevant to whatever context you're in. I find that looking at them from a work unit perspective is a lot easier than trying to say all bugs are 2 points or 4 points, whatever they might be, or 0 points. I've seen. Did I say 4 points? That's not actually a number, but you can type it into Jira. Regardless, if we look at those last sprints we did, we can see the innovation rates for each of these. And if we look at it collectively, this can be rolling average if you want. What we have here is about, like, for this example, say 75% of our effort is focused on improving our product, 25% on fixing things we've already done. So it means on any given sprint, we're probably going to dedicate 25% of our time to bugs. Now, this is important because you mix that in with your Monte Carlo estimate to start to understand how big an experiment could be that you can probably deliver in a sprint. So, quick recap of EBM. Once again, this is just touching on the surface. It's a goal setting framework based on empiricism. We all love empiricism, focusing on 4 key value areas. And there are so many different ways to measure. I would encourage you, if you want a new way to measure the value delivered, look into EBM. And like I said, it's from Ken Schwaber and scrum.org. So now, if we take those 2 cornerstones of Triforce, Monte Carlo estimation and innovation rate, we have Monte Carlo estimation saying you can probably get about 13 PBIs done. Remember, that's our 80% confidence interval. EBM tells us about 75% of our work is innovation, which means you put those together, we get a great experiment size of doing an experiment each sprint of about 9 product backlog items. And it tells you, like, that's your plan to go into it. But then we come to our third section of the Triforce. Is like, what about that execution? And that's where WIP limits come into as being that third cornerstone of the Triforce. Now, WIP limits, it's something I've heard a lot about. And people say you implement WIP limits, and you bring in, you say, team, you can only work on X number of things per sprint, or sorry, X number of things can be active at any time. and the team pushes back. They say we can do more work than that. It's like, well, let's just limit what we're doing. Let's work together. Like, well, what about my work? If you look at our systems like Jira, they support like one person being active on it. So there's this whole I work and my work and the team, which is kind of counterintuitive to how teams we say they should work. Um, and so what I want to introduce to you is like how might we get teams to get around the idea of WIP limits without being extremely explicit. So a cool thing about WIP limits overall though is they do help us focus on bottlenecks in our system, which inhibit our flow of work from left to right if we think about from a board perspective. Now, WIP limits come to us, from lean manufacturing and the Toyota production system, which you might have probably read about in the past. But behind it, there's this little thing called Little's Law. Just a little thing, Little's Law. Little's Law that kind of describes the relationship between cycle time, how long it takes something to get done, throughput, how much you can do in a period, and these WIP limits. Um, so overall, why does this matter? Because if your WIP, your work in progress, goes up, generally unbounded because you don't have a limit. And if the throughput remains about the same, then your cycle time's going to go up. And as many people like to say, with a high cycle time, it's taking longer to figure out whether you're right or wrong. So the shorter we can get that cycle time down, the quicker we can learn that we're right or wrong. And a mantra I like to use with WIP limits, with talking to team, is like, how about we stop starting and start finishing? So I talked about the Little's Law relationship, but really here's what it looks like is if you want to do the math or maths, depending on where you grew up, you can see cycle time on the left, which you can figure out by taking the amount of items in progress and dividing by how many you're completing. So it's work in progress equals, um, or cycle time equals work in progress divided by throughput. Now, you can say, Fred, it's all great and all, but how do we really get this to understand? How do we get this? Does this actually play out in real life? I will say I was a proponent of saying we need to limit WIP, but it didn't actually having evidence that it worked or didn't work. I want to share with you now is some data. Now, this is from Actionable Agile. I did layer a bunch of charts together to make this one make sense. What we have here is our for a period of a couple of months actually. We have the red line is the work in progress measured on a daily basis. The green is the cycle time, which is how long things take from going from when they start to when they're finished, and the black line at the bottom is throughput. I want to show you how they, relate beyond just that math I showed on the last slide. I want to draw your attention to this first inflection point right here. So this is when the product team asked the developers to push themselves. We want to meet this deadline. And as you can see there, WIP did start to go up. That's our red line. Um, and initially, that green line cycle time, that lagging metric, did start to go down because people were working harder, working more hours, getting more things done. But that's not a sustainable pace. And very shortly thereafter, cycle time started rapidly rising to the point of things weren't getting done. There was so much in-flight work because we're trying so hard to get things done. And what I did here at this other point, I introduced the concept of aging WIP, aging work in progress, to the team. Now, you can see from this result is that the work in progress started going down. Cycle time still went up because it's a lagging metric, but then it started actually coming down. And where we're at today is significantly better than where we started this time period. And one thing I'll call out at the bottom, that's our throughput. Throughput remained about the same, between 0.5 to 1.6 per things done per day. So I didn't actually tell them like, hey, let's have WIP limits as how we're going to drive this behavior. We focused on like this concept of aging WIP, talking about what had been open the longest and how as a team we can focus together on trying to get it done. Sometimes it's just calling out those little things like, hey, how can we get this thing done? Pretty simple. And I'll show you two ways you can do this. Now, on the left monitor, if you're lucky enough and work in organizations to invest in Actionable Agile. I'm not sponsored, just a happy user. You can bring up this aging WIP report on a daily basis with the team and ask them about those pesky items. They're going on much longer than we average do. At the top, those blue dots, those are the things to focus on. Asking, like, what's it going to take? How can we get those things to that next stage of development? Or how can we finish those out? How can we mob program, pair program? What impediments need to be removed to get rid of those things that are lingering out there just in this unfinished state? And then that lowers your WIP as you get those closed. Now, if you don't have Actionable Agile, but you do work with Jira Cloud, not Jira on-prem, but Jira Cloud, they introduced a feature a while last year sometime with Insights. It operates in much the same way. And this is how I used with the team that you saw from that last chart. Is we open this up on a daily basis and we just talk about the stuck work. Now, even if you're with a team that has an operations team that has tons of stuck work, you could still pull this up and just focus on your 3 oldest ones. Let's start getting things done. Let's start finishing the work. Now, if you're running Azure DevOps or some other tool or Jira on-prem, it's going to take some manual work for you. But if you focus on those things, that helps. If you focus on the oldest items, it will help bring your WIP down, your work in progress, which will help you get things done faster and help you hit that goal you had for that experiment. So WIP limits. One thing I didn't mention, it's very old. It's based on queuing theory. It's about this relationship between throughput, cycle time, and work in progress. Stop, starting, and start finishing. And if you have the opportunity to use Actionable Agile with Jira Insights. So that's our third corner of the Triforce. Now, all the pieces are starting to fall in place. The Triforce is now formed. But the question you're asking yourself in the audience is, Fred, that's great. I know about these. I have my toe is dipped into the waters of these 3 concepts. You talked a little bit about how you can help with WIP limits, but how do you execute it on a recurring basis? So what I have here is this drawing. You're probably familiar with this construct from Scrum. And this is how you can apply these 3 concepts, the Triforce of predictive delivery, into your normal work stream. The first thing you want to do is take your Monte Carlo estimate from that you did with your Monte Carlo estimate based on what you have done. You say, hey, we can do about 13 work items this sprint. You mix in your innovation rate. You say, hey, that experiment, that epic, should be about 9 work items, where those are 75% innovation. And there we go. Our sprint is planned based on that. Additional thing I'll say with using PBIs versus story points, sprint planning generally is a lot easier. You're not trying to negotiate in a 3 or a 5 or whatever. It's just like, let's focus on the work units. So you have your plan. Sprint's ready to go. But what about that daily scrum? What do? Well, that's when you bring up that aging WIP. Probably not on the first day of the sprint or maybe even the second day because everything is new, but it's a regular thing. Bring up with the team, get them focused around that teamwork, about delivering, about that commitment that they have. And you want to start asking the question, is our sprint goal at risk if you're not already doing that? Because that also helps focus that WIP, that work in progress conversation. When you do this, you get back to that happy scrum master, that happy product owner, and those experiments that you get done. So here it is. It's all in all of its glory. The Triforce of predictive delivery. It's about that Monte Carlo, which is how many work items we probably do in a sprint. EBM, what's our innovation rate? And WIP limit, stop, starting, and start finishing. Now you're going to ask me, did it work? I'm going to say yes, and I don't know. I'll say yes because it took a lot of trust when I started this with a team, especially with the product owner, to get this off the ground because it was a new way of thinking about it. We did it for the first sprint, and it worked great. We actually got something done and delivered. But as the story goes, there was a reorg, and before I was able to get this back up and running with a new team, my engagement with the organization ended. But still, I have that Triforce in my back pocket. That's what I got. Thank you. So now we can open it up to some questions, some Q&A.
All right, folks, over to you. First one from Rupert.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. That was really useful. I had a question about Monte Carlo in the context of um, both varying team sizes through sprints, as happens quite a lot in the context of some clients I work with, where we pull in different skill sets, platform engineers, data engineers, for instance, depending on what needs to be delivered in that sprint. So the team size can change, and also the size and complexity of particular items can change. So that influences how many PBIs you might deliver in a sprint. So how would your Monte Carlo cope with those variables?
Good question. One I'm dealing with right now, we have on a team, an engineer going on a very long vacation. And what it's doing, it's making your system a little bit unstable. So if you have that, anytime you have that a change in your system, like number of people or whatever, your ability to predict what you will do based on what you have done,
Yeah,
the confidence is lower. You can't really show that in data, but it can give you that starting point. Um, if you have any data around like what's happened traditionally, you can use that to help influence this, because it's all about shaping these experiment sizes. And then at that sprint planning level, asking the team, can they commit to this? So I know that's not like a whole answer that you're probably looking for, but when your system size changes, you there's no way to like math it out really. People will try, but you can't really math it out.
yeah,
Um, I still would probably look at it just to kind of get that influence point. Like the story I was telling is with this person going on vacation, I made it very clear to the product people actually today. I said, we cannot forecast past this point because our system is changing. But I can tell you within a probability, what we probably can get done before they leave.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Saruchi, you have a question.
Yes, Fred. So EBM, right? I mean, we have done the certification, we know everything around it, but have you actually implemented EBM in company and identified or found it useful like how to measure the value that we are delivering to customer? Have you implemented that? If so, please share experiment that you have done there or the steps. If not, how would you recommend to conduct the overall EBM framework?
Um, yes, I was on that journey, and like I said, my engagement unfortunately ended before I could get it rolled out across the organization. But with anything, our mine specifically, sometimes go towards measuring something quantifiable. Numbers are the blanket for many people. Numbers are a blanket of executives and CEOs. But what you got to do is start with that goals at the very top, whether it's EBM or OKRs or whatever, or GQM. You got to start with like, what is that organizational, divisional, department goal? And then go down the chain from there, from like your big goal. Like with EBM, they have they have a big goal. Then they have the
Strategic,
intermediate,
you mean to say
strategic,
strategic goal?
yes, strategic goal, the big goal, then intermediate goals. And then that's where you get like, how might we measure the value of it? And it comes down to like having those conversations with the people in the room and asking like, how might we, when we think to design thinking, how might we measure this value? And then you can start to introduce some of the new ways of measure that are in the EBM guide. I had a conversation a couple months ago with Todd Miller, and we were talking about this unrealized value, which I was trying to help coach a PO around. And we are getting, the PO is getting stuck on trying to figure out how much value they'd get out of this deliverable.
Mhm.
And Todd introduces this great concept. He's like, what about the reverse of that? What are we going to miss by not doing it? And that was much more easily quantifiable. And then from there, we could actually have conversations around it. And to wrap this up, Suruchi, make spreadsheets, update them often, and talk about them.
Sounds good. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you. Mike, you got a comment?
Yeah, Mike's next.
I do, Fred. Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
Good. Glad my audio is working because often it doesn't, and it's a bit embarrassing just seeing my lips moving without any audio. Anyway, the what do you call it?
Triforce.
The Triforce. Yeah, seems like it has at least 4 aspects and not actually 3. The one additional one is the one that you alluded to, which is team health. So it appears that all of these things work fairly well together, but against the backdrop of a team that's happy and healthy. I think you said that at one stage you were pushing the team, or the team was being pushed, and you start finding that they're not happy. And unhappy teams, you tend to get higher attrition, so you want to keep that at a good steady rate. So that was my comment more than anything else. Was maybe that middle section can just be filled in with little happy faces.
I like that, Mike. Thank you. That's a great, you're absolutely right, because that does make a huge difference in how a team works. And I will say the push came before I got there. So had I heard the push, I don't know what I would have done in that situation. All I know is what I did do, which is we started talking about we had too much in-flight work, and we started using those Jira insights. I'm making myself a note about happiness and as the middle. I know.
Yeah, I think the point is you'd already said it. It just wasn't articulated on that diagram, and I think it was a very valuable point.
Thank you.
I believe that's it for the hands up question. There are a few in the chat, Fred. So, how many sprints do you need to have concluded to be accurate with your Monte Carlo estimation? I think you responded to this with the number of items, not necessarily the number of sprints. So, please feel free to confirm.
So in a Kanban system, which doesn't have sprint boundaries, they'll say you need at least 10 items in order to create these probabilistic forecasts of how much, like when will it be done and how much can I get done. It's 10 items. It's a very small amount of data. Now, when it gets down into sprints and Agile, I would probably lean towards 3 sprints worth of data with leverage, leaning more into more, probably going back more than 6. It's too far in the past given the kind of work you do. So short answer is probably 3 sprints.
All right, next one. Question from Elena. Monte Carlo simulations can be used in a scaled environment to make a prediction, or can they? I think it's can they be used in a scaled environment with around 20 teams to make the prediction of the whole program and not just per team? So the question is, how can you scale Monte Carlo beyond a team level?
Hello, Alina. The way I would do
Fred.
is I would look at the and I would actually roll it up one level to the initiative level. If you're talking about from a release train perspective, like how many initiatives have we gotten done, more so than the idea of the individual work items. That is how I would probably tackle it. If I'd open that up to the floor, if anyone has any experience working with Monte Carlo in a scaled environment and what you've done.
So I can certainly jump in, not with personal experience, but you were talking about Dan Vacanti and Pratik Singh. So there's some YouTube videos on some new stuff that they've been doing over the last year, I think it is, on scaling out exactly that across or at scale. So I would encourage having a read and having a look at that.
Thanks, Mike.
Do
Yeah,
you
that's
happen
also a
to
very
have the
new
link
book.
to the videos?
Well, I know that Dan or Pratik just came out with a new book about scaling, I believe.
And just from personal experience with Actionable Agile, you can set that to an issue type within a Jira instance, for example, and therefore you wouldn't necessarily be looking at it just as a single team. That you can also set it to the specific number of teams. You could set it to beyond just issue type. You could set it to like epics and a number of things as well. So there is the ability to look at the data en masse as opposed to just at the team level. That's specific to Actionable Agile. I haven't really used other tools that look to Monte Carlo forecast. Mr. Matt, I'm going to say your last name wrong. Savish.
Segvich. That's
Segwitch,
close enough.
sorry.
I've heard much worse. Yeah, just a comment about the Monte Carlo estimation. One thing to remind people of is don't go back too far in your history, like because your teams are bound to change, and you'll include bad data as part of your probabilistic model.
Absolutely. Thank you for helping remind us of this.
Yep.
And Alina, I did post a link to Pratik's book, Scaling Simplified. That's his new book, which talks about some of that stuff that Mike was bringing up.
Wonderful,
And on
thank you.
YouTube, you can always look at Drunk Agile podcast on YouTube. They record their episodes, and it's some good quick hitters on many of these topics.
I'll drop something in the chat now in terms of a YouTube link as well.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Final hand up currently is Chris, and not myself. Fellow Chris, great name by the way.
Hi, yeah, it was just a comment about that question about rolling up the Monte Carlo forecasting. So I've not seen it done at art level, but you would have different art backlog items, which would be different from the team level ones. So your enablers and your stuff that you're doing on the architecture runway. So I guess you would do it using those at that level.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. Are there any other questions anyone has before we close things up for the day?
I do want to hear from Shaquille mention the comments about implementing EBM with those clients. If you have a minute or two to share that, Shaquille.
Good catch.
Maybe they took off. And a dog has entered my office.
So one of my clients is using.
Yeah, we're having trouble hearing you, Shaquille. I don't know if you want to maybe write it in the comments or whatnot. I'm not hearing anything.
Strategic goal of I'll paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me. You know, being more agile, and then they have more intermediate beneath that. No worries.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm very finding it difficult to follow along with what you're saying, Shaquille. Perhaps you could share your insights
is that better?
via
That is better, sir.
much. Yes, thank you. Possibly not. All right. Yes, write something up. Is there anything final, if you wouldn't mind sharing that, writing up? Okay.
So
well,
maybe just really quickly.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris. I just dropped a link in there. I think they call it the Portfolio Forecaster,
Which is a separate tool from them, which you can also invest in. It's another great one.
It is, but I have dropped a link in there if it's useful to anybody.
Beautiful. Well, I just wanted to let you know about our upcoming sessions. The next 4 are already in the diaries. So you have, on the 15th of Feb, we're hearing from the Agile AI guy, a dialogue on Agile AI frontiers at Snail. We have Nina and Jaka, some friends of mine from Slovenia, talking about new ways of working in progressive organizations. We have Shipra Kayan talking about facilitating product decisions, February 27th. And Mr. Michael Lloyd on dysfunction mapping. This is a reschedule of his previously scheduled one from back in last year, because how rude of him to have a baby and disrupt that. So he's kindly agreed to reschedule his session for March 14th. I'm just going to paste to you the links to those sessions in the chat so you can navigate your way there, click on the button and sign up if any of those are of interest. Anything anyone else wants to share before we close things out for the first session of 2024?
Thank you for hosting me, Chris. I'm very excited to be here and be part of this community.
You will, by the way, folks, as you leave, you will be prompted by Butter to give a bit of feedback on the session. You can do a rating in terms of how much fire this session was and provide some words as to how it was for you. feedback is absolutely key to continuous improvement. So do take a moment to help Fred by giving him some feedback that he can use to improve on the session. I know you're planning to deliver this a few times this year, aren't you, Fred?
That is my goal. I've submitted to quite a few, and every time I do it, I iterate just a little bit more.
Beautiful.
Including I have a video game themed one that I alternate that I'm working on. It's a little more leans into Zelda.
I'm already interested as a fellow Zelda fan. All right, gang. Pleasure. Until next time. Bye-bye now.